On the dark wooden table, a love letter lay still, its paper stained with blood and curling slightly at the corners. The tired yellow light from above cast a thin streak across it, revealing shaky handwriting full of affection. Outside the window, the distant wail of a police siren faded into the cold wind. A single officer leaned down, picking up the letter with gloved hands, letting out a quiet sigh, as if sensing something was off. In that heavy silence, everything seemed to be holding on to the secret of a fresh wound. Then a voice begins, slow and deliberate, drawing the listener into the darker corners of human emotion. Some stories don't start with hatred. They begin with a love so beautiful, so pure, that you almost believe it could save everything. But when love goes too far beyond reason, it stops being love and turns into a storm nobody can control. This is the story of the moment that love changed its color. He was the kind of guy everyone's met somewhere along the way, quiet, gentle, always trying to do the right thing, even when the world around him was falling apart. He worked at a small shop, earning just enough to live slowly, live lightly, and keep his heart from hardening. For years, he hadn't left any big mark on anyone's life, but he was always the one people felt safe around. Then she walked into his life in the softest, most unbelievable way. She carried a warm smile, eyes that seemed to speak, and the habit of lightly touching someone's arm when she laughed,
like I'm finally
making anyone near her
myself.
feel more seen, more important. She worked as a barista at a small cafe, a quiet refuge from the city's noise. Her gentle nature and kindness made him feel noticed, heard, and cared for in a way he hadn't felt in years. Their love came as naturally as breathing. Long evening walks through empty streets, steaming bowls of noodles in an old kitchen. Little scraps of conversation they made him believe she was the one he had to protect with everything. But the more he loved, the more fear crept in.
I've been thinking about what you said.
Fear that one day she might disappear.
Really?
Fear that the world would be too
About
cruel
what?
for someone so fragile.
I love
That
these
fear
old
grew in
streets.
small ways,
They remind me-
sometimes a frown when she stayed out late, sometimes questions that were a little too intense, leaving her slightly uncomfortable. Her friends noticed his worry and often warned her that he loved her too much, but she would just smile and say it was rare to find someone who loved so genuinely. She didn't realize how love, when driven by fear, could turn into something else entirely. The first love letter he ever wrote to her still sat in a wooden box, clumsy handwriting, but sweet. No one could have guessed that months later, another letter from him would become the most important piece of evidence in a case that shook the entire city. The first cracks showed up quietly, so quietly that anyone from the outside would have thought they were just the usual bumps in a normal relationship. One, she came home late after her shift, and he paced back and forth by the window, heart racing like something terrible was about to happen. When she finally walked in, the smell of coffee still clinging to her clothes,
It's like
he
a
bombarded
gentle
her with
whisper,
questions, as if he had lost her for
quiet
hours.
secret shared between us.
She tried to calm him with a soft smile, saying the cafe had been busier than usual, but that smile didn't soothe him anymore. It only scared him that one day he'd wake up and she'd simply disappear into the crowd. In the days that followed, she started to feel a heaviness in the way he watched her.
But what would I do
He asked
without
where
this
she was
place?
going,
You
who
two
she was with,
understand, don't you? It's
when
my
she'd be
whole
home,
life.
always with a tightness in his voice that made it hard for her to breathe comfortably. She didn't blame him, but she needed space to be herself. One evening, after a quiet dinner where neither of them spoke much, She gently told him she needed a few days to think about everything. Those words cut straight into the core of his fear. To her, it was just a pause, a moment to breathe, to look at their relationship with some clarity. But to him, warning sign, a shadow of loss creeping closer, the same kind of darkness he had been running from his entire life. He didn't hear her with reason. He heard her with panic swelling in his chest. In the days after she left, he couldn't sleep. He walked past the cafe over and over, just to see the light inside, and hope he might catch a glimpse of her. He reread their old messages, the simple, sweet lines that once made him believe he was enough for a love like hers.
What is so difficult here?
But now, every message felt like evidence, proof that she had been slipping away from him long before she asked for space. And then another man appeared. He didn't know who the guy was. All he saw was a strange car parked in front of the cafe, a silhouette walking inside, and the smile she gave him. That was all it took. A storm hit him, ripping away whatever reason he had left.
What do you mean?
He thought he was losing her. He thought someone else was taking the one thing that gave his life meaning. Slowly, fear turned to obsession. He started following her, not in a violent way, but in the desperate way of someone who has no idea how to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. He stood at a distance when she left the cafe. He watched the warm light from the apartment where she lived. He tried to read signs, to understand what was happening. But the more he watched, the deeper he fell into a spiral of doubt. Then one night, under thick clouds and a city wrapped in winter breath, he wrote another letter. Not a sweet one like the first, but a letter from a heart in free fall. He wrote that he loved her more than anything, that he would protect her even if the whole world stood against him. It was part confession, part promise, part cry for help from a soul sinking fast. And then came the night everything changed. He slipped the letter into his jacket and walked down the empty street like a man being pulled toward a place he already knew he couldn't return from. His mind churned between love and panic, between wanting to keep her safe and believing someone was stealing her away. Every step felt heavy, every breath filled with dread. He didn't know that this would be the night that shifted everything. The night love crossed the line of the heart and slipped into a darkness he never imagined he could touch. The night he made a choice he would never be able to forgive himself for. The street that night was almost empty, lit only by the dim yellow glow of street lamps reflecting off the cold, rain-soaked pavement. He stood pressed against the corner of a building, breath quick and uneven, his hands clenched so tightly. His knuckles had turned white. In his jacket pocket was the final letter, soft, wrinkled, carrying the weight of days of fear and desperation. He stared toward the cafe where she usually finished her shift. His heart pounded violently when he saw her step out, walking beside the man he'd seen the day before. They talked softly, and she smiled the smile he'd always believed belonged only to him. In that moment, something inside him cracked. He couldn't tell what was real, or just fear leading him by the throat. All he knew was that he was losing her, the only thing that kept him standing in this world. He moved toward them. Both she and the man looked startled. The man asked what he wanted, not harshly, just firmly enough to make him feel threatened. She stood between them, anxious, trying to explain something neither of them really heard. At first, it was only words. But the storm inside him had been building too long. The man stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder in an attempt to calm him. But that single gesture, small, human, meant to de-escalate, hit the deepest, rawest part of his fear. He jerked back, shouting that no one was going to hurt her, that he wouldn't let anyone take her away. The air stretched tight like a wire ready to snap. She tried to step between them again, but he didn't see her anymore. He saw only someone trying to steal the person he loved most. And then time stretched thin. A shove. A heavy thud against the pavement. A body collapsing onto the cold road. It happened too fast. When he looked down at his own hands, he didn't understand what he had done. The man lay motionless, breath shallow, eyes wide with shock and pain. She screamed a scream that tore through the night and ripped apart whatever was left of him. He dropped to his knees, shaking as he touched the man's shoulder, repeating that he hadn't meant to, that it was an accident. But his words drowned beneath the sudden roar of rain, falling harder. She was crying, hands trembling as she tried to call for help, while he staggered back, as if pushed deeper into a nightmare with no exit. He turned and ran. His footsteps echoed wildly across the dark street, like the heartbeat of a man who had just lost his entire world in seconds. The letter slipped from his pocket when he collided with a trash bin. The wind lifted it briefly before dropping it into a puddle, where it soaked up the blood coming from the injured man. Loving handwriting, promises to protect now smeared, red, and ruined. The letter that once came from a tender heart had become evidence of a tragedy that couldn't be undone. Police arrived minutes after her call. Blue and red lights flickered across the wet street, painting everything in chaotic color. An officer bent down to pick up the letter with gloved hands, frowning at the soft handwriting, stained with dark blotches. She knelt next to the wounded man, hand over her mouth, eyes filled with terror and heartbreak. Within hours, the story spread across the city. A beautiful love story twisted into a violent tragedy. People took sides. Some called him dangerous, unhinged. Others said he was a victim of love that had grown too deep, too terrified of losing what it cherished. But for her, no explanation softened the pain. The man she once trusted most had become the one who shattered her life in a single cold, rainy night. And him standing in the shadows of a distant alley, watching the police lights flicker from afar. He understood that he had crossed a line he could never return from. He had done the unforgivable. And he knew, in that moment, that his love had finally turned into a crime. The trial took place on a cold morning, the sky a flat gray, as if the whole city was grieving what had been lost. He was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, his steps slow and heavy, carrying the weight of that night with every movement. The room fell silent as he entered, not a judgmental silence, not even curiosity, just the kind of quiet people reserve for tragedies no one ever wanted to witness. She sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes red as if she'd cried for hours. When his gaze briefly met hers, something inside him twisted. She didn't look at him with hatred, but the warmth she once had for him was gone. What remained was the gaze of someone deeply hurt, someone who had lost more than words could ever fix. When she took the stand, her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to be heard clearly. She told the court that he had been a good man, someone she had trusted, but that fear had swallowed him whole. Then she said the line people would repeat for weeks afterward. I never asked him to protect me like that. I don't need anyone to trade a life for the sake of loving me. The courtroom grew so still you could hear people breathing. Outside the courthouse, the public was divided. Some said he deserved the harshest punishment for taking an innocent life. Others argued that love, when pushed too far, can drive a person into actions they don't even recognize as their own. But none of it mattered to him now. All he could think about was the image of her crying at the scene, the man motionless on the ground, the love letter stained in blood. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't try to defend himself. His voice was low but firm as he accepted full responsibility for everything that happened. He didn't blame the circumstances or the people in her life. He simply said he had loved too much, and that love had become a fire that burned down his entire world in one moment of panic. The night before sentencing, he sat alone in his small cell, the dim yellow light casting shadows on the cold wall. He took out a piece of paper he was allowed to keep and wrote one final note to her, not asking for forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve that, but wishing her peace, hoping she wouldn't carry his darkness with her for the rest of her life. The letter was nothing like the ones he wrote before. No passionate promises, no vows to protect her. Just the quiet regret of a man who finally understood that love isn't about holding on, it's about letting go. And as he folded the letter, he knew his fate was already sealed. Not by the verdict coming in the morning, but by the choice he made on the night love overtook reason. In the end, when the story closes, what remains isn't the crime or the verdict, it's the question of how people can lose themselves in the emotions that seem most beautiful. The two letters still exist. One soaked in blood on that rainy night, the other written in a prison cell. Not with despair, but with the quiet clarity of too late understanding. They stand as two opposing fragments of life, reminding us that love can save, but it can also suffocate when fear takes the wheel. Some people love with their entire soul, yet they don't realize that love isn't about holding on too tightly. It's about letting the one you care for be free. And sometimes, tragedy doesn't come from a lack of love, but from too much love directed the wrong way. In the end, love is only truly beautiful when it doesn't turn anyone into someone they themselves wouldn't recognize. If this story made you think, reflect, or feel deeply, hit that like button and subscribe to Sins and Lessons for more stories where love, fear, and human choices collide. Every story is a mirror, and every lesson is yours to take.